Hello, welcome back to OK So. And I'm going to remember to introduce it right now by saying this is the only fully unscripted history podcast out there. And if you know of another one, please don't tell me because I like feeling special. Thank you. Close. All right. So today we are going to be talking about hauntings and hidden cemeteries in New York City, because that is a very fun subject that surprises a lot of people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you.
Turn that off. It won't load now.
Producer Brian is going to make it so that I can share my screen with you. Hey, cutie. Do you want to come up here? Okay. Now people are going to log in because they want to see you and your beautiful face. See, there it is. There's Smeagol. Okay. Right. Almost there. I accidentally turned the iPad off. This is entirely my fault. Or rather, for some reason, iPad settings have changed and it turns off after 2 minutes instead of staying on completely the way that I want it to. So that's fun. I can only see your ears. Here, let's interview Smeagol. Hello. Did you know that you're very cute? Good. Okay. Hi. Oh, thank you. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you my Google Maps, which is coming up. And if you are listening to this in the podcast, don't worry. I'm going to make sure that everything is totally followable, besides Smeagol's cute face. You can't see that. Hey. Nicely done. Okay.
Did you just turn off again? No? Okay.
No,
See if you can set that so it doesn't turn off before we get too far.
I can't. For some reason, it won't let me. All right. So this is my Google Maps. I know it looks absolutely insane, but I promise it's extremely organized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that I meant to do this. I thought I did this earlier. That's not what I want. Okay. We are just going to do my cemeteries, hidden graves, and hauntings. It's only 61 right now. There's a lot more. But let's start with one of my favorites. Washington Square Park right here is it is formerly the location of a potter's field. And what a potter's field is a graveyard for, or a cemetery, not a cemetery, it's a graveyard. A graveyard for people who are indigent, who can't afford a proper burial, whose families don't identify them, if they're executed as criminals, etc., etc., etc. That's what a potter's field is. So this area, Washington Square Park, used to be a potter's field. And actually, most parks in Manhattan used to be potter's fields. It's
Keep your thumb on the screen at all times, otherwise yeah.
Keep my phone on the screen?
Keep your thumb on the screen.
Oh, the thumb. That makes more sense. Okay. So most parks in Manhattan are former potter's fields that were basically almost none of the bodies were dug up when they changed them to parks. So Washington Square Park, for example, has approximately 20,000 bodies under it. They were supposed to be buried at like really deep, but there were a couple massive illness outbreaks, especially cholera in the city, and a whole bunch of people died. And so they wound up, like most places say that they got lazy. I don't think they got lazy. I think they got overwhelmed. And so some of the bodies are only 3 feet down, if that. So anytime that there's any sort of construction whatsoever in Washington Square Park, they, or near Washington Square Park, they, without fail, find remains. Sometimes it's like within 2 shovelfuls in the dirt. People will say that they have found remains that are now coming up in every single shovelful. Some workers working on, I think, the street across from Washington Square Park, they found multiple burial vaults because it's not just a potter's field. There were also a couple churches nearby, and so the graveyards, the cemeteries for those churches are also still there, because basically what they did when they made the park is they just removed the stones and went right over it. So that is definitely something that will lead to a lot of fun energy. I dropped the charger 5 seconds after producer Brian handed it to me, because that's just who I am as a person.
You're charging?
Yes. All right. So that's definitely gonna cause a lot of fun energy and potential hauntings on its own, but it gets even better. Not only was it used as a graveyard and some cemeteries, it was also used as an execution ground. It doesn't really get much better than that. There's a misconception that there's an elm tree in the northwest corner of the park right here. See how it's labeled Hangman's Elm? That's not, that is a misnomer? I've never said that word out loud. I've only read it. So some people think that people were actually hanged from the elm tree itself that's still there, and that's not true. In fact, the history book that I was reading earlier, or the ghost hunting book that I was reading earlier today, said that people were hanged from the tree, but that would be against the city ordinances / guidelines. And so people were they had to be hanged from constructed scaffolding. So people weren't hanged from the tree, they were hanged under the tree or near the tree. Either way, the tree witnessed multiple executions. And if you go see it, I posted pictures of it before on the Okay So Instagram, but if you see it, it looks spooky. Like the branch, it just has a weird vibe. But it's not even just that, it's also outside of Washington Square Park and around Washington Square Park. For example, right over here is something I've done an episode on before, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Formerly the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. It is now an NYU building. It's called the Brown Building. So I'm going to try and just like recap really fast what the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was and what the fire was. I don't need you. Go away. No. There we go. All right. I definitely just turned off what I was doing. Sorry. There we go. All right. So the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was what we would today call a sweatshop, but at the time was considered pretty advanced for the workers who worked there. Mostly immigrant young women. Between the ages of the youngest was 14 and the oldest was in her early 40s. And they, oh gosh, it's all so, like, there's so much to it and it's so upsetting. But basically, it was a sweatshop. They had gone on strike for better working conditions, although better safety conditions hadn't really occurred to them at the time, unfortunately. But it doesn't really matter because they barely got any of their demands at all, because the owners of the factory were rich a-holes who were immigrants themselves, which makes it all the worse. Like, they came to the country poor. Smeagol, stop. Cut that out. Smeagol keeps accidentally licking the screen, which is why it keeps moving around. Thank you, honey. Thank you so much. So they came to the country poor, and they were garment workers, which was one of the few jobs that was kind of like available to them as immigrants from Eastern Europe, and I believe that they were also Jewish. But instead of kind of like, hey, now we've made it, let's, help other people make it, they were like, cool, now how do we keep all this money and make even more money for as little cost to us as possible? That is the fun that's the fun mindset that they had, because this was early 20th century, and workers' rights weren't really a thing yet. This was before the 40-hour work week was a thing, before the weekend was a thing. For example, the workers at the Triangle Shirtwaist factory were working 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and that 7th day, they didn't have it off. They just only worked 9 hours. And the day of the fire, hey Joan, here's a full Smeagol. Welcome to the chat. She's very excited and she keeps licking the screen and my hands. So the day of the fire was a Sunday. And so they were getting out early. Instead of getting out at like 8 p.m., they were getting out at 4:45 p.m. So everything started around 4:40. So everyone was packing up. They were getting ready to go home. They were chatting about what their plans were for the evening, because it was like their one early evening free a week. And Smeagol, here, do you want to try and set it so it won't turn off? You can take it off the screen for a second. So it was about 4:40. Everyone was going, and one of the things in the factory, well, multiple things in the factory, they first off, the doors were locked because the owners thought for sure that given the opportunity, any of these women would absolutely be stealing supplies and everything from them. So they kept the doors locked. And then the one door that was unlocked, they had in like a severe bottleneck so that they could inspect the bags of each woman as they left for the day to make sure that they weren't stealing. There was no like history of stealing. In fact, the way that things worked back then was that if you worked in like sweatshop type thing, you were expected to provide your own materials. And if you didn't provide your own materials, then you were charged for the materials that you used, for the electricity that you used if you were working in a shop that was new enough to have electricity. They charged for all of that. And yeah, so the women were being treated really, really poorly, but it was one of the factories that treated people better than the other factories nearby did. And so the day in question, they were all filing out and waiting to have their bags inspected. And one of the things about the factory was that this was before things like fire hazards were really known. Things like emergency exits, things like fire drills. None of that was a thing yet. And so the factory floors were basically like really, really long tables lined up with sewing machines, and they were just completely crammed. They had as many people as they could possibly fit in there. And so it was the long tables and then a narrow space between them with 2 chairs back to back for each side of the tables. So right then and there, that's a fire hazard to say the least. And then on top of that, just everything. So the building was marketed as fireproof, but and they were technically correct. Like, the building itself suffered almost no damage, but all of the furnishings inside, all of the people inside, everything inside besides the actual building structure itself did not fare as well. And basically what it came down to was 146 people died, mostly young immigrant women, and a lot of them didn't speak English, and they were also, a lot of them were the only source of income that their families had. And so yeah, 146 people died. Not only women, there were also some men, because there were people who would like cut out the patterns, people who would cut the cloth. Like, there were different jobs that men could have, but the seamstresses were all women, and so the majority of the people there were women. And when the fire started, it started quickly, and within I think less than 5 minutes, the entire floor that it had started on, because the Triangle Shirtwaist factory was only the top 3 floors of the, I think, 10-story building. And so it was only the top 3 floors, and it started on the 8th floor. So the first floor of the factory. It started there. Within 5 minutes, the entire floor was completely just devoured by fire. And a lot of the people on that floor, though, did manage to get out safely, because it was right at the beginning of the fire. They had the warning of being able to see the fire. And whereas they were able to warn the 10th floor, which is where the executives were, where the owners were. They had their young daughters with them. One of them had his young daughters with him that day. They all survived. So the 8th floor and the 10th floor knew that there was a fire, and they were evacuating, but no one told the ninth floor. The 9th floor knew there was a fire when they saw a fire, and by then it was too late. So most of the people who died were on that floor. And that floor is now a chemistry lab for NYU. I am absolutely desperate to get in and look around and be able to, so I've been working very, very slowly on a book, and the opening of the book that I have planned is, it is surrounding the Triangle Shirtwaist factory. And gosh, I would love to be able to get in and just kind of see what it's like there. I've seen a picture online, but it's definitely not the same. And I'd like to, be able to talk to people who work in the building and be able to check the elevator shaft that a lot of the women died trying to get out that way. The majority of them died by throwing themselves out the window. And so one of the things that people will see often, especially NYU students late at night, is they'll see like shadows falling from the up high windows and then like disappearing before they hit the ground. They'll also smell smoke. There have been multiple reports of women dressed in like old-fashioned clothes, so like, to the point where like they were like, are you actors from the drama school around the corner, which is called Tisch, and things like that. And so it would be women like crying and looking like dazed and lost and trying to find their way out, and then like the person would follow them and then they would disappear, stuff like that, the huge. And yeah, like I've been over there a bunch of times. I am very drawn to this disaster. I read a book all about it called Triangle. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it is, oh, perfect. It was very good, and the author not only went full in depth, but bothered to identify the last remaining unidentified victims. And this was in 2010, 2011, something like that. So the last victims were identified at 2011. Yeah, 100 years later, exactly. But yeah, I really recommend that book. It's absolutely fascinating, really well written, and he really goes into the stories of each of the women, each of the people who die, and like it becomes more than just an abstract disaster. It becomes something that is like personal, and I really, really recommend it. It's really good. So yeah, so that's Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Then, also by, sorry, I went away from the mic. All right, also by Washington Square Park, there's the Bobst Library. And content warning, I'm going to be discussing suicide. That is the main theme of this building. If you are triggered by that, please skip ahead. If you are watching this right now and you don't feel like you can handle it, please mute for a minute or so until I move on to the next one. But the Bobst Library has been the site of, I didn't actually look how many suicide victims, but multiple, like a bunch over the years. And can you asterisk out like the first I or something? Just to censor it, to be nice. Perfect. So basically, this is an NYU library, and NYU students will come and kill themselves in the lobby, especially. And one of the things that the school did to mitigate this was add these pretty cool looking panels, honestly. Like look at that. Like it looks like a matrix code or something. And yeah, so that is meant to keep anyone from being able to jump, which is what they were doing in order to kill themselves. Gosh, it's such a pretty building. But yeah, so really tragically, like especially around finals time, and multiple things, and so people experience weird things like books moving when they shouldn't be moving, sounds. I think people have seen apparitions. I don't think there've been any like full body anything, but yeah, so that's one that weird stuff has happened. And like people keep being drawn to it. And I've talked about this kind of like at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles in my Halloween series from several years back. It's like at a point, it's like the first couple people, it's like, okay, what is causing them to do that? But after a while, it does become like known as, here's the place where you can do this. Here's the place where everyone goes to do this. And so probably there's an element of that there. And obviously NYU is a very stressful school to attend. It's also, I think, the most expensive school in the country to attend. So yeah, Bob's Library. I've walked past it a couple times. I've never actually been inside. But yeah, lots of suspicious things there. So now I'm going to move on. Suicide content warning over. So hopefully people are back. If they had to skip forward, this is where we're starting other stuff. 85th and 5th. No. What are you doing? I just want you. Okay. So there is a building nearby. That's Bryant Park, not Washington Square Park. There's a building nearby called the Brittany Residence Hall. Here it is. And it started out, I think, as a hotel. And it is rumored to be very haunted. There's an elevator shaft in particular that people say is haunted. The urban legend around it is that a girl died falling down the shaft or whatever. And so that elevator shaft is haunted, haunted elevators like you do. And one thing that's really sad, just as like a history, architecture nerd lover, is that I'm pretty sure that this is the one that used to have like the windows used to be like small little crosshatch panes. And it was like, the pictures are really cool, and they replaced them with these, which is a bummer because it's boring. But anyway. So let's see. Okay. Here's Gay Street. The one of the most popular signs to be sold by like little tourism tchotchke carts. People love buying gay street signs. And since Pride 2 years ago, I think, they actually changed the sign to, this is just Gay Street in general, to say like it's Gay Street, and then below that Lesbian Street, and then Bisexual Street, Transgender Street. Like it goes through all of it's a whole line of them, and it's like a big rainbow, and it's very cool. And I think that it was supposed to be just temporary, and they wound up leaving it up permanently. But the street used to be used for rich people nearby. It was their that's where their servants lived on that street, and that's also where their carriage houses would be. So you can kind of see, like, it's all old. It looks like a movie set is what it looks like. Like, it's unreal. Some of the streets here, man. But yeah, so number 12 Gay Street is supposedly haunted. Like most of the buildings on the street have some sort of something or the other. Number 12 is just where it's the most concentrated. There have also been along the street themselves, there have been apparitions. There's a man wearing a top hat and a cape who shows up often, just kind of strolling down the street. There are also like party goers in 1920s outfits that show up walking down the street, like laughing and everything, and then they just kind of disappear. You know, the huge. It is also one of 2 streets left in Manhattan that have a bend. And I feel like that is a really good segue to the other bend, because the other bend is 100% a part of this. So we just scooched on over to Chinatown, which is why so many restaurants popped up. Random fun fact, in case you didn't know, one of the reasons why there are so many Chinese restaurants around the country is because the Chinese are the only nation to be specifically targeted against with a law of whether or not they can live here. Up until, like, I guess Trump and the Muslim ban kind of counts, but not nearly to this extent. It was made so that if you were Chinese, you could not move to America. And so Chinatown wound up having a really interesting vibe, because at the time it was almost entirely men. There were almost no women in Chinatown, because they could come over, the men could come over as workers, and then before they could bring the women that in their lives over, the Exclusion Act happened. And so as a result, Chinatown became extremely violent. And had gangs pop up all over the place called Tongs, Tongs. And oh man, were they violent. They were called, a lot of them were called hatchet men, because that was their preferred weapon, using hatchets. So you can imagine how fun those battle scenes would get. So one of the main sites of aforementioned battle scenes is this street right here. If you hear jingling, that is Smeagol going crazy with the scratching her ear. Are we good now? We're good? We're good. So this is Doyer Street. It's also called the Bloody Angle. And one of the reasons for that is because there's this bend right here, and what would happen is the tongs, one of the tongs would hide around the corner so that an approaching tong could not see them, and then as that tong got closer, the ones around the corner would jump out and ambush them, and lots and lots and lots of people died right on this little tiny street right here. And that's not even mentioning the fact that doing this is going to make the map be a little wonky, but I'm going to say right here-ish, so the apotheke, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. I knew I was going to do that weird thing. Why do you hate me? Okay. So right here, there we go. Zoom. I really want to sing the song from Xenon. If anyone else just did that in their head, you're not alone. So right here, this used to be an opera house, and it was considered a neutral zone. So the Tongs could come and see a show and relax and unwind and watch some of the few women in Chinatown perform on stage for them. And because it was a neutral zone, you had to like check your weapons at the door, and it was just a nice chill place. Until 1905, when there was a performance happening, and in the middle of the performance, the Tong in the front row, or like one of the first few rows, stood up in the middle of the performance, turned around, and just gunned down the at least one of the Tongs behind them. It might have been multiple Tongs, but it was just a brutal annihilation of human life. And after that, the opera house was closed down. And yeah, so there's definitely really interesting vibes on this street if you go. I like to just kind of like go and chill, and the Nam Hua Tea Parlor right here is one of my very favorite dim sum places, and it's been around since 1927. And oh man, it is so good. But yeah, so that is Doyer Street. So right over here is Columbus Park, just a little hop, skip, and a jump over. And this is what used to be the center of Five Points, the old slum that used to be located here. If you've ever seen the movie Gangs of New York, there's a like massive battle that takes place in the very beginning, and then another one in the same place at the very end. And that place is what used to be right here, actually specifically here-ish. It is now a very cute, bright red and yellow Chinatown playground, and and it's just like the chillest vibe. It's so funny. You would like, I do not get weird vibes here, but like just knowing what happened here, like all of the death that happened in this particular just little like few blocks radius, man. But if you do go here, so 5 Points was called that because it was where five streets would meet in the middle, and that was Paradise Square. So this was Paradise Square here. And so you can see, like, not only did they get rid of 5 Points, they literally, like, changed the grid entirely to erase it off the map. So, like, some of these streets used to be part of it. They are renamed. One of the streets was erased completely. Yeah. So, let's see. Let's find another one. Ooh, okay. Let's do the churches. Some of the churches here. So if you go all the way down to the very southern tip of Manhattan, the first one that you're going to come across, if you basically go up Broadway, you're going to find two. The first one is Trinity Church. Trinity Church is one of the oldest... Ooh, I just made the thing go away. Trinity Church is one of the oldest buildings in this... Or not one of the oldest buildings, but it's one of the oldest... congregation feels like the wrong word, but congregations in the city. It was founded before New York was even New York, back when it was still New Amsterdam. If you go to the cemetery there, the oldest gravestone is from the 1680s. I have a picture of it on the Okay So NYC Instagram. It's very cool. Like, you can find it because the back of it is decorated as well, which is not a common thing there. The back of it has like a skull and wings, and so that makes it really easy to find. And it's for a small child who died before, it was like the year or 2 years before Trinity Church was even established. So that grave is older than the church, which is older than the city. Yeah, it is a really nice place to just kind of go and walk around. It's also supposed to be super haunted. One of the people buried there is Alexander Hamilton. Along with him, there's Eliza and Angelica's there, and the older Philip is also there, although we're not sure exactly where it is, because his gravestone was lost. So we know that it's somewhere around where his parents are buried, but not exactly where. And I have a mild issue with just the way that it's laid out. Like Hamilton's tomb is, or gravestone is, like way phallic, like way phallic, and it's very much like, look at me, and you can't miss it. Like, I've had tourists stop me and ask me, like, where's Alexander Hamilton? I'm like, walk into the gates, turn left, and you will not miss it. Like, it is right there. Whereas Eliza, his wife, is buried directly in front of him, and her grave is just like one of those long markers, all like fully in the ground. And it kind of looks like a doormat. Like, I don't like it. Like, it makes me really sad. Just the way that it like comes across. And then Angelica's buried around the corner. And like I said, Philip is buried somewhere around them. But the actual oldest is St. Paul's Chapel, right up Broadway, like literally just a couple blocks out. And what's funny is that Trinity Church, so right along Trinity Church right here is Wall Street. And Wall Street is named that because there used to be an actual wall there. And it was built because Peter Stuyvesant, who we are going to discuss at some point hopefully in this episode, if not in like whatever part 2 I do in the future, he will definitely be coming up. He built that wall there he didn't do it. He used enslaved human beings that were stolen from Africa. But he had the wall built there, and to protect from any sort of invasion from the English, from the natives, from any sort of animals, because the island was a beautiful, beautiful wilderness. And so the church was basically like right up against the wall. The problem was that a lot of the rest of the island was used as farmland, and it was a really, really long walk for farmers to get to Trinity Church, since that was the only church available. And so they built out of town St. Paul's, and you can see how far out of town it is because it's right there. Ta-da! So that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 blocks up. But yeah, so that was the one that was built. Trinity Church is not the oldest building because it was completely destroyed by fire twice. So the building that is there right now only dates to, I believe, the mid-19th century, whereas St. Paul's was built in the 18th century and is still the original building. And my therapist used to be like really, really near here. And so after therapy, when I needed to unwind, I would just walk over to St. Paul's and I would just go sit in the back. There's a little cemetery back there. And like, I don't know how to describe it, man. It is very unique energy. Like, and it would just help me like unwind from the outpouring of emotion that comes sometimes when you have therapy, you know? And just very peaceful, but also like active at the same time. I don't know how to describe it. It's very singular. And one of the things that makes its energy so unique, besides the fact that it's the oldest building in the city, and you know, like there are people buried right there who have been buried there for hundreds of years, directly across the way is the World Trade Center. So the memorial is right here. So this is where the old buildings used to be. The new building is here, the One World Trade, and the Twin Towers were right here. So if you look where St. Paul's is, it's literally just right there. So on either side of the iPad screen. And So on 9/11, one of the like wild things with St. Paul's was that it is right there. Like buildings around were just completely destroyed, whereas St. Paul's, the only damage was there was one window pane that was broken, and there was also the organ. They had a massive pipe organ in the church, and the pipes were just completely destroyed by all the dust coating the inside and the outside of the pipes. So there were two casualties of St. Paul's. There was the window pane and the pipe organ, and I realized belatedly that using the word casualties was not great. But that is not how I meant it, and I apologize if it came across as such. But yeah, so the world, like, I don't really want to like lump the World Trade Center in with this. I will say that I've also gone to the memorial site to unwind before. It's beautiful and it is calming, and you wouldn't expect that from that site, but it is just a soothing, calm location. The footprints of the towers are now giant, like fountain waterfalls. Let me see if there's a picture. There should be a picture. I'm not gonna bother with that. But the actual footprints of the towers are now these giant fountains that are surrounded by the names of all of the people who died, not only that day, but in the bombing that happened in 1993 that killed 6 people. So those 6 people are also memorialized along with the people who died in 2001, which is pretty cool because the memorial for those people was all but destroyed that day. There's like a small piece of it that I think is in one of the museums. I've actually been to both museums. There's 2 of them. One of them is on the footprint. You can see it right here, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. The museum is actually below the fountains in the footprint, and it is very, very powerful. And then down the street a ways, there's another one called, I think, the 9/11 Tribute Museum. And that one is one that was put together by the families of the people who died. So it is more of like a personal thing, and there's always survivors there who will tell their stories a couple times throughout the day. And yeah, it's beautiful, it's powerful. When I was there, I spoke with a fireman who was there that day, and one of the things was that he had cancer because of, the dust and everything that day that has been killing lots of people since. But anyway, this is not a 9/11 episode. So I'm going to move over to here. This is a good space. City Hall Park. So in the episode that I did on Thursday last week, I talked about the tearing down of the George III statue in the Bowling Green. And that story started out here in City Hall Park. This was the City Commons. It was like, just like St. Paul's, it was slightly out of town because town ended right here with Trinity Church. So everything north of here was out of town, and that included the Commons. So this is where you could bring your livestock to graze. This is where you could post announcements. This is where you could make announcements out loud, like the town crier, etc. And this is where people would just gather and meet. And this is also where executions happened. There's one story in particular. There was a rebellion orchestrated by multiple enslaved humans, and it was almost successful, and then it was squashed. And by almost successful, I mean like they actually managed to get fairly far into it, and they killed a couple dozen white people, which is actually unfortunate because that led to the execution of the same number of black people, whether or not they were involved in the rebellion. They did not stop to check if who they grabbed was involved or not. So it was just random people. And it sounds like it was truly horrific to witness. There were Some of them were hanged. A couple of them were burned alive. One of them was roasted alive. So different MOs. And so directly across the way is the, well, not directly across the way, it's a little ways over. Where are you? Columbus Park. The Municipal Building is right here somewhere. I can't Smeagol. Okay, now I can actually see the iPad. I have it bookmarked. Oh. Gosh, it's been a long time since I've been able to walk around here. About a year and a half. But okay. Somewhere here, for some reason, I'm not finding it, is the Municipal Building. It is one of the tallest buildings in downtown Manhattan. I have an emotional attachment to it because it is where I was able to see, wait, is this it? I think this is it. Yeah, this is it. It's just not labeled correctly or fully. So this is the Municipal Building here. So it's right across from the City Hall, which is why I was confused. But when they were building the Municipal Building, which is this giant building with a giant gold statue on the very top, very difficult to miss if you're anywhere near downtown Manhattan. It's a little bit easy to miss during nighttime. During the day, it's harder to miss for sure. And so I love it because that's where I got to go and see the commissioner's grid plan of 1812. Like it was the actual map that they built that was like hand drawn. Like you could see the little etch marks and everything. Oh, I was nerding out so hard. Like I spent way too long in that room just going over it. It was like, I think it's like 100 feet long altogether. And I looked at every inch of that map. But okay, less awesome is what happened when they were building it. So when they were digging the foundation, they came across several skeletons and they were completely unsure what they were, who they were, why they were there, etc. But there were clues because the skeletons had chains on, like manacles for wrists and feet, and a couple of them were charred, like the people had been burned. So it is believed that those are the bodies of the people who were killed, who were murdered after the unsuccessful rebellion. And we don't know what happened to those skeletons. They just disappeared because at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, you were still just like, oh, this is inconvenient. So I'm just going to hide it somewhere and we don't know where. So yeah, like this whole area just has a really unique energy. It's my favorite part of the city is the financial district. Just every single block has some unique history to it. And I have made a point of learning so at least one story for just about every block. And it is, it's beautiful. The architecture is beautiful. The history is powerful and the vibes are strong. So that is my ringing endorsement of the financial district. If you come visit New York City, or if you live here and you just haven't really hung out down there. So let's see. What will we do next? Oh, here is a fun little hidden graveyard. Okay, I've got two more hidden graveyards here. So one of them is the oldest graveyard in the city. And that includes Trinity. This is the first I don't know how to pronounce that word. Sheriff? Sorry. I know that I've read that word a million times and I've never said it out loud or heard it. I think it's Sheriff. Sorry. Israel Graveyard, Chatham Square Cemetery. Or Chatham Square, sorry. So it is literally like right off of this like busy square. And people don't even notice it. Like, they just walk right past it. But if you, like, it's gated. You can't get inside. This is what it looks like if you go around to the gate. It says, there's a plaque that says this tablet marks what remains of the first Jewish cemetery in the United States, consecrated in the year 1650. So that's like 20 years before the grave in Trinity Church. When it was described as, quote, outside the city. During the War of the Revolution, it was fortified by the Patriots as one of the defenses of the city. I swear I can read. If you're listening to the podcast, it's hard to read. And then the rest is just basically when the plaque was put up. So that's that picture there. Let's see if there's any more. But it's really cool. If you like peek in, there's these ancient graves toppling over, broken, just like the ultimate spooky aesthetic, honestly, except that it's right surrounded by busy Chinatown. But yeah. So, the first cemetery of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, Shirtwaist, Israel, in the city of New York, 1656 to 1833. And they were able to preserve this part of it. Obviously, there used to be more. If you can see the map that I'm working with right now, you can see how it's a triangle. It used to be a square or a rectangle. And who knows if the bodies are still there or not? Presumably not, because there is a street there. Now, the other one is the African burial ground, which is not what they called it at the time. They used a different word other than African. And this was also outside the city. And this was, in the episode last week, I described how 5 Points came about and why it became a slum. And it originated as a massive freshwater pond. And so the enslaved people of the city, back then below Wall Street, were allowed to bury their dead outside of the city in this little plot that was right next to the pond. And so it had weird drainage issues. It was always kind of muggy. And then after the rebellion that I mentioned just now, the city put into effect a rule of no more than, I want to say 10 people, no more than 10 black people gathered at a time, which meant that the funerals were made extremely difficult. And it was like after sundown, like I think you couldn't be out at all. I can't remember the exact specifics. I will almost definitely do more episodes on this. I'll probably do an entire episode just on the African burial ground, because it is a place that I have gone to many times. There's a museum around the corner that is beautiful and powerful. There's one that is African art. Wow, it is just really not marked on there. There's one that's African art, and then there's another one that is to do with the burial ground itself. And being enslaved in old New York / New Amsterdam. The burial ground itself is super pretty. It's like that's what it looks like. It has so it's a big circle around a globe, and with the Africa and South America as the focal points, which is rare that you see that in a globe. And circled around it are they found different sacred symbols from different countries and tribes, etc., of Africa, and incorporated that into the memorial. And then this one here, it's like a curly heart with more curlies underneath. It's really pretty. But I have a magnet that I got at the museum because I collect magnets from everywhere I go in the city if they offer them. And it's a sacred symbol. I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I don't want to say exactly what it means. But like I said, I will almost definitely be doing an entire episode on this. If you want to see more, I have done posts on the OK So NYC Instagram with lots of pictures and more descriptions. So definitely check that out. But what happened here, why there's the monument in the first place, is that in the early 90s, they were working on construction to put up a new office building, and they started coming across, like, really far down, they started coming across like destroyed coffins with skeletons where, if you look at the pictures of them, they are squashed flat by buildings and earth and stuff. Like, it's very weird seeing a skeleton like that. So it basically, construction came to a halt because they wanted to figure out what was going on, what they'd come across, and looking at old maps and looking at the evidence unearthed, they figured out that it was the old African burial ground. And that then became a cultural thing and a very specifically historical thing. Like, that is something very important. There's not a lot of evidence of Black history in this country. It tends to get erased, tends to get burned down, tends to get buried. So having that was very important. And what they wound up doing was they did like a forensic investigation of I can't remember if they unearthed 419 coffins or 420 coffins. Maybe 421. But it's within a digit of 420. I remember that very distinctly. So they had unearthed these. They did like a forensic investigation, an anthropological investigation. They documented the trinkets that were buried along with the people. And if you go to the museum, they have recreations of those trinkets that were buried. And along with the story of what this trinket probably meant to the individual who was buried with it. Yeah, if you come here, I really recommend that. And it, like I said, there's definitely an energy there, but it is a very peaceful energy. It's an energy that I really enjoy. Or not enjoy, but it's an energy that soothes me. Let's say that. All right, let's find another one. Ooh, okay. This one here on Spring Street, 129 Spring Street. This is now a very fancy clothing store, a Western European clothing store, I believe. I think it's Italian, and it is high end, let's say. And like, if you are watching and you see this, you can see that, oh, actually you can't because I'm hiding it with my body, but now I'm not. It says saved in Hamilton and 2 more lists. Now, why is this random Italian clothing store saved in Hamilton, you ask? That is because there is, let's see if there's a picture of the basement, because in the basement there is an old 17th, 18th century well. Here it is. Ta-da! Kind of stands out a little. If you are listening to the podcast, please go and check out the OK So NYC Instagram. I have pictures of it from within 2 weeks of moving to the city. I went and I checked this out because I was so fascinated by the idea that there was this thing in a basement of a fancy clothing store. So, why am I talking about a well? There was and what does it have to do with Alexander Hamilton? Obviously. So in the 1790s, I think it was, like the late 1790s, there was a murder that happened. There was a body that was found in this well. It was a woman who had gone missing from her boarding house several days before. It was believed that she'd gone and eloped with her gentleman caller, who was also staying at that boarding house. And Several days later, they found her in this well, dead, and it looked like she had been strangled. And obviously, the very first suspect was her gentleman caller. Because she had been telling people that they were going to be getting married, and I think she told a friend that they were going to be eloping, and so people had thought that that is where she had gone, except that he then returned and didn't have her. So, obviously this was super suspicious, and they did a massive investigation into it. And where Alexander Hamilton comes in is it's not just Hamilton, it's also Aaron Burr. They became his dream team lawyers. If you are familiar with the musical, as I'm sure many of you are, there's the song, the Act One finale, the Running Out of Time song. I'm blanking on the name. Running Out of Time? Is that what it's called? You know what I'm talking about. That song. In that song, there's a part where Hamilton addresses the jury. And he goes off on like, you'll see my client Levi Weeks is innocent, and why is this important? Oh, it's, like the first murder trial of of our new country, and so it's super important that we do this right, etc., etc. And then Burr's like, Hamilton, sit down. My client Levi Weeks is innocent. That's all you had to say, or whatever the lyric is exactly. I'm sorry. I know a bunch of you are very angry that I'm getting things wrong, but I'm getting the facts right. That's what's important. Thank you, Joe. You know you don't know the title, but you know what I'm talking about. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. Some of you are just mad that I don't know the title. So that is the case of the murder well. Levi Weeks was the name of the gentleman caller, and he was acquitted. They did come back with him with a not guilty verdict. Now, they might have come back with a not guilty verdict because back then, when you had a case, from the beginning to the end of the case, like from the very opening statements to the verdict delivered by the jury, no breaks. Like, you kept going. Like, I'm sure, like, maybe you got, like, water breaks, bathroom breaks, etc., but, like, you didn't get sleep breaks. You didn't get, like, I'm assuming that they fed them at some point, but they weren't allowed to, like, leave and eat. And when it came time to deliberate, they asked the judge specifically, like, can we please have a sleep break before doing this? And the judge said no. And so they went to deliberate, and half an hour later they came back and they had a not guilty verdict. Now, if they'd had a sleep break, if they hadn't been so sleep deprived and exhausted, who knows what the verdict would have been. But they came back with a not guilty. I personally don't really have a solid opinion on if he's guilty or not. I could see it going either way. It's very Corpse Bride. Like, that's what it always reminds me of. The mysterious gentleman caller and the murdered young woman. But yeah, so this building is supposedly haunted by her. There's a apparition that shows up of a beautiful young woman who is like covered in moss and crying. And so she shows up fairly regularly in the building. That's the only like major apparition that I'm aware of, but there were lots of accounts of just weird things, like things moving when they shouldn't be, things things moving, things disappearing, the usual like spooky, tricky ghost thing. Yeah. iPad stopped charging. Producer Brian is fixing it. I'm gonna drink some water while we do that. Wherever my water went. There it is. Ha. Wonderful. All right. So that's COS. COS. I honestly don't know how you say it. But it's very cool. Again, if you're in New York and you want to be in a spooky mood, go check out the Murder Well. And a lot of the people who work there or go there regularly don't know what it is. And like when I went and was taking pictures of it, the employees were looking at me funny. Like, why is she taking pictures of that random well that we have? Like, I was the weird one. But let's see. What else is there? Okay, here is another church, because, you know, churches love being haunted. Why won't you let me do that? So, this is St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. And one of the things that, if you are watching this, you might notice, is that it is diagonal to the grid plan. And that is because it is older than the grid plan. It's actually like the second oldest building, I think, in the city. There's like, after St. Paul's, there's like 3 buildings that were all built super close together. And if you are a giant NYC history nerd like me, and you're going, hey, Francis Tavern is the oldest, not St. Paul's, technically yes, but because of all of the massive restoration that it's had and the damage that it sustained and had to fix and everything, it is not considered the original building anymore. So yes and no. Officially it's St. Paul's. So St. Mark's is right up there, and so you can see right in front of it, there's the street called Stuyvesant Street. And earlier I mentioned that I would be bringing up Peter Stuyvesant later, and right now is later. Peter Stuyvesant was the, I think he was the second official governor of New Amsterdam, but like the first real one. He was like someone that I would not have gotten along with at all. Like super, like picture like the angry, like priest, teacher, principal who's always getting you in trouble and talking about how you're going to hell because you've offended God with your behavior. That's how I kind of picture Peter Stuyvesant, or Petrus Stuyvesant. He had a peg leg. He lost a leg in battle and walked with the peg leg and a cane. And so that is important because it gave him a very distinct sound when he walked between the peg leg and the cane. And so, I was talking about how it doesn't follow the grid plan because it's older than that. So there used to be there's a famous road in Manhattan called Bowery. It's not as long as it used to be for reasons that I can do a whole episode on later. But it used to go all the way up the island, basically. And the Bowery is, the name Bowery comes from the Dutch word for farm, which is, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's Bowery, just spelled differently. And so Peter Stuyvesant had one of those, and when he was overthrown, when New Amsterdam became New York, he basically like retreated and lived on his farm for the rest of his days. And so the way that they laid out the farm was they actually followed the north and south like guidelines to lay out the grid, whereas Manhattan today has the grid following the orientation of the island itself, which is at a tilt. So the grid used to be at basically diagonal to what's there today. And so this street is one of the few things left over from that grid. And you can see that it goes a couple blocks there. So that's where St. Mark's Church in the Bowery is. It is the second building that they built for the church. The first one was destroyed in a fire and then a storm, I think it was, something like that. But it basically, within days of Peter Stuyvesant dying, he started haunting this church. He started showing up in the graveyard, especially at night, and people would hear his very distinct walk, and some of them would see him. and he tended to like stand over his own grave. He tended to like just walk around the graveyard looking all angry the way that he had in life. And when his farmhouse burned down, when his home burned down, like that was one of the earlier sightings of him. And he was like seen walking around the debris after the fire was out, like poking through it and looking upset. So that's spooky. I would very much not like to be haunted by Peter Stuyvesant. He seemed like the worst ghost to be haunted by. Like being haunted by an angry priest. Sounds like actual hell. But one of the things that his ghost is considered to have done a couple different times, or one time and it's just been repeated differently and placed in different years, is that he will start madly ringing the bell, or he will, like that's what people believe now, but who knows. The bell will start ringing without anyone pulling it, and will summon people, and when they go to see who's pulling the bell, there's no one there, and the rope is actually cut off so that it's too high for anyone to reach and pull. And they can't find the rope anywhere, and then like the next night they find it on top of his grave. So that has happened either multiple times or once, and people don't know exactly what year it happened. So spooky. Yeah. So that's St. Mark's and Peter Stuyvesant. So if you live here and you've heard the name Stuyvesant a bunch of times, now you know who that is, because his name is all over the city. In Brooklyn, in Manhattan, like it's everywhere. So like there's a whole neighborhood in Brooklyn called Bed-Stuy, and it's Bedford Stuyvesant. So yeah. All right. Let's see what else there is. Okay, here's this. Okay, James J. Walker Park is named after Mayor James Walker, who you might know as Jimmy Walker, the... Producer Brian, what kind of alcohol is that?
Jimmy was Scotch.
Scotch, thank you. It is named after him. He was the mayor of New York City during the Prohibition era. And him having a Scotch named after him is not ironic because it was Prohibition. It's because he was known to be at the speakeasies, and he was like a naughty mayor. And he would like go to the speakeasies with different women. He would be seen around town. He would spend money like crazy. He was corrupt and stealing money. The usual class act. And yet he was still super popular. Like, he was around for a while. And he grew up right by this park. And so when the park was... when he was growing up, it was a graveyard. And he used to play around Johnny Walker. Yeah, it's the same guy, though. The Scotch is named after him. Like, that's all I've ever heard about, is that it's named after him. I don't know why Wikipedia says it's someone else. But, okay, I've literally only heard that the Scotch is named after him, but Wikipedia says it's someone else, so it could be either way. But, either way, James Walker grew up nearby, and would play amongst the gravestones when he was a kid. And St. John's burying ground for St. John's Chapel of Trinity Church. 10,000 burials there. And like with the Washington Square Park and most of the other parks, they didn't move the bodies. It was for a church that basically wound up closing, and they gave very little notice to the congregants who had loved ones buried there. And then they wound up kind of like extending the deadline and giving people more time to disinter their loved ones if they so chose. But only a handful of people actually did, because most of them considered disturbing the dead to be super sacrilege, and it would ruin their loved ones' afterlife. So most of the bodies are still there. Like, I think that it was less than 10 bodies got moved. And they decided to name it after him for whatever reason. So that's James Walker. And now, nearby...
16 years after the whiskey was shipped first.
Really? So that's just something that people got wrong, and I read. Huh. Okay. So the booze is not named after him. I'm wrong. Or I was lied to, one or the other.
Well, you're still wrong either way.
Yeah, it's true. All right. So we are now going to 1F by land, 2F by sea, which is a super hoity-toity fancy restaurant now. Look at that. Look how pretty that is. It's gorgeous. It's one of those restaurants where every single night at least one couple is getting engaged. Really expensive, etc. And it is haunted by Aaron Burr and his daughter Theodosia. Which is honestly kind of weird because this was their carriage house. So it's kind of like going and haunting your garage after you die. Some people have cool shit in their garage, so I'm not going to discount it entirely. Maybe they had cool shit in their carriage house. But this is where they've apparently chosen to spend their lives, or their afterlives. Lots of pictures get knocked down. People will see figures. There's lots of footsteps from upstairs. Like unknown footsteps. I think like, is it this one or the other one? No, that's somewhere else. Okay, sorry. That's what happens when I have no script. It's in my head. And there's lots of haunted places in New York City, so some of them might get mixed up. I'm doing my best to not let that happen. But yeah, haunted by Aaron Burr and Theodosia Burr, who, if you are not aware, had a very mysterious death. She was sailing to see her father after Aaron Burr killed Alexander Hamilton. There was a whole shit show that happened, and he, long story short, wound up kind of like escaping to Europe for a little while. And so he and his daughter Theodosia were extremely close. The song is extremely accurate in that regard. And she really was having a difficult time without being able to see her father. Like, she'd just recently gotten married, and so she'd moved to, I think, North Carolina. And so it was already difficult for her being that far away from him. And then he was going through all of this stuff, and she wasn't there for him. And then he was basically exiled, and she wasn't there for him. And then he finally came back. And so she got on a boat to come and see him for the first time in several years, and was never seen again. The entire boat was never seen again. Presumably it was lost at sea, but no one is absolutely sure. There were weird rumors about like pirates and her being taken captive, etc., etc. But yeah, like basically like the accepted version is that she died at sea in a storm, because there was a storm that happened around the same time. So kind of open and shut, you'd think. But either way, she and her father haunt here. And like, look at the like neat little second story window up there. Man, it looks so cool. Okay. So that's 1F by land, 2F by sea. Now we're going to find another one. I'm just going to kind of like scroll around. Okay. Madison Square Park is another one that used to be a potter's field, and the bodies weren't moved. So it's kind of the same thing. There's I think 10,000 bodies under Madison Square Park. Different from Madison Square Gardens. The concert arena, sports arena is not, as far as I know, built on top of a potter's field. This is the park right across the street from the Flatiron Building. Lots and lots of bodies under there, and it's supposed to be haunted. There's a lot of interesting history that happened in that park too. I'll have to like talk about that one day. It's the very first place that electric street lamps were tested out. Like, that's just like one cool thing, is that they put brand new electric street lamps in the park to try out, and it was the first time that people could actually see at night. And like, it basically made crime significantly decrease, because you could like see like around the corner, and you could see in little nooks and crannies that people used to be able to hide in. And yeah, so the neighborhood used to be kind of, it's interesting. It has an interesting history because it's both that rich people used to live there and it used to also be shady. Managed to be both. But that's kind of like the history of Midtown in general. So yeah. Okay, Hotel Chelsea is by all accounts super haunted by multiple spirits. There's this is where Nancy Spungen was killed, like ostensibly by Sid Vicious, and one or both of them haunt the hotel. There's also the writer Dylan Thomas, I think. There's a bar nearby that he used to go to and drink himself silly, and one day he wasn't feeling well and he decided to go to the bar anyway and got drunk and wound up dying like that night or the next day. I can't remember which exactly. But he apparently haunts both the hotel where he lived and the bar that he drank himself to death in, which, let's see if I can find that. It's on here. It should be down here. It's called McSorley's Old Ale House, I believe is what it's called. Right there it is, McSorley's. Nope, that's the public theater. I want McSorley's. There we go. So McSorley's is an old-time bar with Irish bartenders, 2 kinds of ale, light or dark, and sawdust on the floor. And it is supposed to be super haunted. There's Dylan Thomas, who apparently sometimes still hangs out at the table that was his favorite table, and would have been where he was drinking on the day that he wound up dying. And then there's also a sailor named Mickey who haunts the bar apparently, and he will swipe drinks. He will pinch women's buttocks, and when they turn around, there's no one there. You know, the usual. The upstairs used to be like at one point it was a boarding house. At one point it was a brothel. Like it has like this wild. Oops, I made it go off. It has this like wild, like definitely, like supernatural energy, let's say. And then I didn't actually mark this down, but right here on Bowery and Houston, there is what the okay. Where'd you go? Bowery and Houston. There we go. There is this garden right here called the Liz Christie Quaint Community Garden, Plots and a Pond. And that site used to have a place called the I can't remember the dude's name, but it was the Suicide Hall. Sorry. Oh, content warning for suicide again. Skip ahead, mute for a minute. This is going to be really short, I promise. It was an old bar that had a brothel upstairs and became known as the Suicide Hall because people kept going and killing themselves there. Mostly extremely poor people or sex workers who were in some sort of bad situation or another. Mostly they would go upstairs and drink poison, but a couple threw themselves out the window. And now it's this like super cute little garden. And what a contrasting energy, you know? And like, I've not been in the garden, but I've gone past it a whole bunch. And like it honestly, like this whole section of Chinatown on the Lower East Side all kind of feels like a contradictory energy because so much happened there, so much bad history, so much good history, and it used to be like super slummy, and now it's become like super artsy and lots of cool street art everywhere, but always lots of ghosts as well. But yeah, so the two of them, okay, content warning over, we're good. No more content warning. So I'm going to drink a water a little bit. Cutie. Okay. I need that when you're done. So anyway, I hope everyone is enjoying it so far. I hope it's not too disjointed. I try really hard to not I tend to have a tendency to overplan things, and so I work really hard on not doing that anymore. And so that's why this is unscripted, why I try and just kind of share what's in my head instead of writing out a script or a book report type thing, the way that most history podcasts tend to do. Because I want to just kind of be free flowing, and yeah, and hopefully that translates this month for the spookiness. I have a theme planned for every week of October, so you're definitely gonna have to come back and check those out when on Mondays and Thursdays. And then I'm also currently in the process of modifying some Funkos, which is something that I used to do a while ago and recently decided to try again. And it's hardcore. It's like sculpting with sculpting epoxy and then dremeling, and like it's not just like painting them and then that's it. It's like I did massive modifications to them. And so I'm done with the sculpting as of last night, and just about done with the priming. And so I might wind up live streaming while I paint them. We'll see. I'm still kind of deciding, but that's gonna be like not with the schedule or anything. So if you would like to watch that, make sure that you turn on the notifications for this Twitch channel. And we'll see. No promises yet, but it's it should be fun. So I'll see.
I just changed your passcode on your iPad because it got shown on there.
All right. I appreciate the warning. All right. Oh, here's one. The Public Theater. So the Public Theater it's where Hamilton did its pre-Broadway tryouts for, among many, many other things. And it just has like an interesting vibe. Like it's which I feel like most theaters, especially here, have. Like I've never been in a theater in like Europe. I've never been in a theater outside of America, so I'm assuming that like old theaters everywhere are like this. But I am originally from the West Coast, where theaters are not old, and here they are not all old, but a lot of them are. And this episode was originally going to be all about the haunted theaters of New York City. But as I was doing research and refreshing my memory and everything, I just kept on coming across more and more stuff. And so I just kind of wanted to do just like haunted locations in general. But now we can segue into theaters. So yeah, the Public, I'm trying to remember exactly what the haunting is there. There's so many haunted theaters. Okay, I'm going to try and remember and I'll come back to it. In the meantime, I'm going to go over to the theater district. We are going to start... Belasco or New Amsterdam. Let's go with Belasco. So the Belasco Theater is one of the like most confirmed to be haunted, like definitely theaters, maybe even like locations. The original owner and builder, Mr. Belasco himself, is supposed to still haunt it. He had an apartment that he made above the theater, and that's where he lived. That's where he had a casting couch that he actively utilized despite being married to Billy Burke, Billy Burke, I think? Not Bobby Burke. One of those. But you know her because she played Glinda the Good Witch in the Wizard of Oz movie. So she was married to Belasco, and he was definitely not faithful, and he was also an extremely quirky dude. He was known as the Bishop of Broadway. He was extremely successful as a producer, etc. and as a seducer or predator of young women. But he had a habit of wearing like a priest's collar. And sometimes like it was mostly just the priest collar, but sometimes he had like one of those like what's it called that the priest would wear over their shoulders, cassocks, I don't remember, but he would wear like priest accessories. And even though like he in no way was priestly or like, the dude lived the party lifestyle. And a lot of that would happen at the Belasco Theater since he had his apartment there. And that was apart from his wife and everything, so he could kind of like live it up there as like his bachelor pad or whatever. And he apparently just never left. He's seen constantly all over the place, all over the theater, and by people who don't know who that is. Lots of times when there's a new show that's coming in and like they're rehearsing for it on the stage, the new actors will later on be like, who was that guy sitting up in the balcony watching? Like, he was dressed up as a priest. That's super weird. Or like after a show, an actor will go to like the stage manager or whatever and be like, hey, who was that guy wearing a priest's collar backstage? Like, he came up and he shook my hand. Like, and that, like, they'll be like, oh, you just met Mr. Belasco. And it's considered a really good omen if you see him, because he apparently only shows up to people that he like approves of and who wind up having good performances. And then things like after hours, lots of sounds from the apartment, which is completely closed up. Like, you can't really get up there anymore. Like, you have to have like special permission, and there's a whole thing to be able to get up there, just because it's so deteriorated that it's unsafe. But the people like a house manager would at night be in her office, like counting things up, doing her job, and she would hear footsteps from upstairs in the apartment. She would sometimes hear music, like, and a party happening upstairs, and she would run up there and no one is there. And at one point she set up a camera upstairs to like catch whoever it was. And so she had the camera live feed in her office, and she'd be in her office working. And then she'd hear the party music, and she'd look at the camera feed, and nothing was there. And that's cool. So that's the main one at the Belasco. And then right across the way is the New Amsterdam Theater, which is like, it's considered the oldest operating Broadway theater. It's currently owned by Disney. Aladdin is shown there. Or it's not owned by Disney. It's leased by Disney with like a 99-year contract or something ridiculous like that. But look how pretty that is. That's gorgeous. That's what Broadway is like, y'all. Broadway theaters are beautiful. So this is the New Amsterdam. And back in the day, it was used for the... It was used for Ziegfeld Follies. And there is a chorus girl, or not a chorus girl, like she would probably get really mad if she heard, oh, I did it. I turned it off. Oh, is it still right? Hey, cool. I have a different iPad and I keep hitting the button on accident because it's in a different place than I'm used to. So there was a chorus girl named Olive, or an actress named Olive. Why do I keep saying chorus girl? I'm sorry. And she was like the up and coming it girl. She was like going up the ranks. She became like one of the stars of the Follies instead of just a chorus girl. And then she went to Hollywood to try it out there and wound up becoming pretty successful in Hollywood. And she was getting more and more famous. And she wound up marrying oh my goodness, Mary Pickford's brother, Peter, I think, or Paul, one of those. It doesn't matter. So they got married, and they had a very tumultuous relationship by all accounts. And we know that he, at least, was not faithful because he had syphilis and he gave it to her. And that is important because they were having a really rocky time in their marriage and kind of like pulled through it. And so they decided, like, hey, let's go and have a second honeymoon in Paris. And it'll be super romantic and we'll, like, recommit, etc., etc. So they go to Paris and things are going well. And then we still don't know what happened, but Olive dies. And she dies because she ingests a bottle of the mercury treatment that was meant for her husband. So it's believed that she would have these really bad headaches. And so it's believed that she had one of those and thought that the bottle was her medication for that, and found out too late that it wasn't, because her husband was asleep and he was woken up by her screaming his name, and then that was basically like the last thing that she ever said, because it ate away at her slowly. Like her throat was one of the first things affected, and it took 5 days for her to die. And it was not a pretty way to go at all. And and so she decided to come back and haunt the place that she loved the most, the New Amsterdam, where she became a star. Because she not only participated in the Follies that happened, and if you aren't familiar with the Follies, think of like, it was like one of the original like variety shows where there would be musical acts, comedy acts, like sometimes animals, sometimes like later on they would incorporate film into it. Sometimes like it would just be just a wild variety show. And they had a second variety show that they would do upstairs on the roof, which is no longer the roof. It is now converted into offices that Disney employees use. And but it used to be a rooftop garden, and it would basically be Ziegfeld Follies that night. Like the costumes got a lot more risque. One of the things that it was best known for is the fact that it had a glass catwalk that was like up high, like think like a theater catwalk, not like a modeling catwalk. And the girls, or the women, would like walk up and down that glass catwalk, which had all of the customers below, so they would be able to get a view. And so there are things like where the glass catwalk was, people will see a woman like walking back and forth like in midair. And like I watched this like really long lecture given by a guy who like collects stories of Broadway theater hauntings, and he had a whole bunch to say about Olive. Like he would interview people who had encountered her, and there are a lot of people who have encountered her, and he really emphasized the fact that it was consistent across the board. Like he like almost every, like she almost solely appears to men, and all of them would report the same thing, that they had this cute like petite woman, and they would all describe her with the same, physical characteristics, and then they would all do like the same kind of like voice imitation, and they would all say, "How you doing, fella?" Kind of like that. And or "Hi, fella, how you doing?" One of those. And yeah, and so she would flirt with them and tease and giggle, and then at some point, like, they turn away, and then they turn back and she'd be gone. Like you do. And yeah, so she's basically like a friendly spirit there. Like, she's not really malevolent. They have a picture of her at every entrance to the theater. I'm not sure. I've never been to the New Amsterdam. I've been to the New Amsterdam once briefly to see like a special event. I've never been to the New Amsterdam to see a show, like a Broadway show. So I'm not sure if it's just backstage or if it's like the lobby and everything too. But the entrances and exits have a picture of her by them. And when the cast and crew arrive for the day, they are basically required to blow the picture a kiss and say, "Good morning, Olive." And if they don't, things go wrong for them that day. Like, things get moved and knocked over. Things just go wrong. Like, they are actively sabotaged in some way. So, yeah. So they take that pretty seriously. And, I mean, if you are not super familiar with theater folks are superstitious AF. Like the Scottish play thing, like you can't say the name of that play. You can say the name of the character. The name of the character is Macbeth, but you can't say the name of the play. Which is why in the musical Hamilton, there's the thing where he's like, I trust you know what I'm talking about without me having to name the play. And then the next line, he's like, they think me Macbeth. And so it seems like a contradiction, but it's actually, he doesn't say the name of the play. He says the name of the character. But yeah, that's just a little fun thing. So the next one of the really, really big ones with the hauntings is the Palace Theater. If you have been to New York City and you've been to the theater district and you've been to Times Square, the Palace Theater is one that you can like walk right past without realizing. It is in Times Square. It's currently under massive renovation. They are taking it and lifting it up, so because the interior of the Palace Theater is landmarked, but not the exterior. So they're taking it and they're lifting it up and inserting a floor for stores, like retail things for Times Square, below it. And they're also turning it around so that instead of facing 7th Avenue, it's going to be facing 47th Street. And that's currently happening. So it'll be interesting to see if there are any reports on how that affects the ghosts of the palace. Because the palace has many. One of them you might have heard of. Her name is Judy Garland. She is like one of the confirmed ghosts, depending on if you believe in it or not, of the palace. She used to perform there regularly. Like if you've ever seen like Judy at the Palace, and then her daughter Liza Minnelli would do Liza at the Palace as like a tribute to her mom. Let's see what kind of pictures they have so that I can show you. There we go. Ooh, pretty. Okay, so that's the Palace. The last thing that I saw there was SpongeBob SquarePants the musical, and I hate the TV show SpongeBob the musical, and I went back and I saw I hate the TV show SpongeBob SquarePants, but I went back and I saw the musical again because it is so good. I loved it. Like every song is written by new people, like Aerosmith, Sarah Bareilles, Plain White Tees, They Might Be Giants. Like it's great. I love it. Look up the cast recording. It's really good. But back to the ghosts. So Judy Garland used to perform here regularly, and it kind of like became like her home. Like the last live performance that she did before she died was here, and she was really emotional at it. Apparently, like she got up on stage and said like it's so good to be home, like almost crying. But she would perform there all the time, to the point where she had her own like stage door installed. It's not backstage, it's actually in the house, and it was made so that she could like walk off of the stage into the house, walk through the audience, and then out the door into the waiting car. And that way she didn't have to deal with the stage door, she didn't have to deal with the people waiting for her and people wanting to mob her. And so that door has a bunch of weird activity around it. People say they can hear voices on, like, they can hear her on it, I think. But people see her semi-regularly. And if when you go to the palace, there's actually a little display case in the back of the house that has, like, a bunch of playbills and stuff and, like, little trinkets from when Judy Garland would perform there. But she's only one of the ghosts there. One of the other ones is, so there's two who are men who died by falling from a great height in the theater. One of them was a stagehand who was up in the catwalks of the actual stage, and he fell onto the stage and died. And the other one is a tightrope walker who would walk between the stage and the mezzanine on a tightrope. And one day he fell off the tightrope and into the house, and he died. And people will sometimes see his ghost doing the walk again. But it's said that if you see that happening, it's a really bad bad sign for you because most people who do see it wind up dying very shortly after, supposedly. Then there's also 2 small children who supposedly haunt the balcony. One of them is a little boy who is in the back, like behind the seats, and he's playing with his toy cars and trucks. And then, so people like hear the toys being played with a lot. Hi, Smeeks. Hi, Smeeks. Okay. Come here. There we go. Sorry if I hit the mic there. All right, here's Smeagol, everybody. There you go. So the other one is a little girl, and not much is known about the little girl, because the only thing that's ever seen from her is that she kind of like, pops up over the railing of the balcony to watch whatever is happening on the stage, and then just kind of like disappears again. And that's it. And then I think that there's someone who sits in the audience and watches as well. That would be me in the afterlife. I'm going to haunt a Broadway theater and I'm going to just sit there and watch the shows. That sounds like a great afterlife to me. So, let's see. All right, how long have I been going? 10:45, and I started at 9. So this is actually probably a good pausing place, because that's the theaters, which is the main thing that I came here to talk about. So there's going to be a part 2 on Thursday. It'll be the hotboxing history again. So it'll be casual and fun. So bring a drink, or bring a smoke, whatever it is that you like. And join me. And like I said, keep an eye out for the notifications that I'll be going live with the Funko painting, because I'm surprised at how far I've come with that already. So, right? Good. Okay, so we are going to raid Adriana Vega, so please stay tuned because she's amazing. Oh, can you cancel?
Yeah, hold on.
And it's fine. Just let it go.
Yeah, I'll raid.
Smeagol. Smeagol, good. Oh, sounds good. See you Thursday. Okay. Enjoy Adriana. She's amazing. Hi. We good?
Yeah. It didn't
Can you click on her just so I can see her